morning or good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in and joining us from. Welcome to day 3 of the American Horse Council's conference. This is our National Issues Forum Day, and this is our second presentation of the day, and we're delighted to learn more about crisis management, the number and severity of crisis situations that now confront companies and organizations and put their reputation and profits and future at risk underscores the importance of knowing how to communicate, what to communicate, and how to deal with a crisis. And unfortunately, our industry has had its share of crises. So we're really excited to have David Fuscus, the CEO of Xenophone Strategies. Xenophone is a highly focused public relations firm serving many of the world's largest companies and organizations. He has been heavily involved in crisis communications, and he's worked with the media on major national and international crises, including representing the airline industry following the 9/11 tourist attacks and playing a role in a number of different industries. So David, we're delighted to have you. Let me admit this one person, and then I am going to make you the host so that you can share your slides with the group.
The easy way.
Make it the easy way.
Indeed.
Okay, take it away, David.
All right, if you all will just give me a moment here. I will share the screen and just perfect.
There you go.
All right, well, I'm delighted to be here. As Julie said, I'm David Fuscus, and I've been working on crisis communications and crisis management for much of my career, which doesn't make you always the most popular person in town when you're when you're showing up at something, but it certainly is interesting work. So I'm going to dive right in. What I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to give you kind of some of the fundamental rules of crisis communications and crisis management, and I'll use those two words interchangeably because the key part of crisis management is communicating what you're doing. So some of the fundamental rules. I then want to go through a couple of case studies to kind of so you can see how they're applied. And finally, I'm going to finish up with some practical things on planning for a crisis, things you should do, some of the key principles and things that should be done, really by any organization, large or small, when planning for a crisis. Hold on, I got somebody to admit. There we go. So, oh, okay, hold on. That's the end of the. 1 second here, folks. Let me just.
So David, I've reminded everyone as we get used to this virtual thing we do to anticipate technical glitches occasionally.
Well, I was giving a presentation to the Airbus board of directors in France, really captains of industry once. And as you might add, I was a little bit nervous about it. I got up, I had 15 minutes to present on the subject I was presenting on. The IT guy took my laptop, plugged it into their system, and fried the laptop. I mean, fried as in it never worked again. It was a paperweight. And so after that, the technical stuff doesn't really bother me. So let me just hold on, folks. Just hold on. Hold on, let me just, I can do a little stand up while I'm fixing this stuff, right?
So while David's working his way through this, is there anybody in the audience that is looking for something specific out of this presentation? Are you looking for a little nugget? And if so, what would you need help with? So maybe David could address that. Feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself and share.
Okay. Here we go. All right, everybody ready? Sorry about the delay. I always start presentations on crisis with the Chinese symbol, which is really two symbols for crisis. It represents danger and both opportunity. And the reason I always start presentations this way is that there is an opportunity in every crisis. The crises don't just have to be things that can destroy your reputation or damage a brand, but there's opportunities to enhance a brand, enhance a reputation, both for companies and individuals as well. Let's start with what is a crisis, right? It's kind of the basis on this. The definition of a crisis is pretty simple, right? It's anything that can negatively impact your brand, your business, or you as an individual. And as we'll see, crises do, they engulf industries, they engulf corporations, they engulf businesses, and they also engulf individuals. They can be big or they can be small. They can be something that's going to destroy, or not destroy, but impact an entire industry, or something that can impact an individual. And kind of as an example of that, I'd like to talk just for a second about the strange case of Peter Weinberg. So last June, here in the Washington, D.C. area in Bethesda, there was an incident on a bike trail. You may have seen this in the news, where a guy who turned out to be 60 years old was coming down. There were some teenagers, 14, 15, 16 years old, putting up banners supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. He stopped, he ripped them down. He got into a little scuffle with one of them. He went on and they took video of this and posted it on social media. And it became really a viral thing, was the search for this guy who had done this to these kids. The police got involved. They were going to find him and arrest him and charge him with assault. And so what one of the folks did on the internet is they went to the biking app, a biking app that tracks your rides. I don't know if you ever use these, and that information is then shared publicly. And they cross-referenced it, those public rides, with everybody who had been on the bike trail at that period of time. And then they went and they looked up the people, they looked up at the pictures, and they came up with one guy that they thought looked like it. His name was Peter Weinberg. Peter Weinberg is a financial consultant in Bethesda. And he woke up the next day to just absolutely horrific postings on social media, and they were getting out into the press because the internet decided, the social media mob decided that he was the one who had done this. I mean, to the point of, this is the type of thing that was being posted about him. You've got to think that he's a financial consultant, solid guy. He's got a business, and all of a sudden, his life is just being destroyed on the internet. This is just emblematic of the thousands and thousands of posts that were out there about him. But in the end, it turned out that Peter Weinberger was not the guy, that the social media mob got the wrong person. They found the right person. He was arrested and was since charged, but it wasn't Weinberg. But Weinberg did a number of things, I think, just instinctually about how to handle this that helped him get through it and help folks see that he was not the person that did this. And I'll come back to a couple of those things after I go through some of the elements of good crisis communications. So we've got a starting gate. Just full disclosure, I work for Jim Gagliano in the Jockey Club and have for the last 18 months or so. They're a client of ours, so you get a lot of horse racing stuff in here. So the fundamentals of crisis communications. Number one is end it. Everything that you are doing when you are managing a crisis after it breaks is you're doing something to end it. That is your goal. Sometimes you can end it in a day. Sometimes you can end it in a week. Sometimes it takes much longer than that, but everything you're doing is with the goal of ending it, allowing you to rebuild things as you go forward, but you've got to end it. The second absolute fundamental rule is engagement. In today's world with, we don't have news cycles anymore. News cycles are instantaneous with social media. Things move very, very quickly. And if you want to manage a crisis, if you want to be involved in what's being said out there, you've got to engage. You're going to define yourself as opposed to have others define you. If you make a decision not to engage in a crisis, you're not going to be able to manage it well. You're not going to come out well. And one note on engagement: if you're engaging and you're getting to the point where you're dealing with reporters, it's important to understand that reporters are not your friend. They're also not your enemy. I've been working with reporters for 35 years, and I can count on one hand the number of reporters who have really been unethical that I've dealt with. So reporters are generally folks doing a job, but they're not your friend. They're not your enemy. Third thing is credibility. If you're going to engage and you're going to be involved with this and you're going to help shape the story, you've got to be credible. And what makes you credible? Transparency and information and facts. You hear the word spin sometimes in relation to public relations and crisis management. The word spin implies that you're pulling the wool over someone's eyes, that you're getting something out there that's not true. And that just isn't what works today. Transparency, facts doesn't mean you have to give out all the facts, but transparency, facts give you credibility, and you need credibility to properly manage a crisis. The fourth thing is take responsibility. If you've done something, your organization has done something, if you are caught up with something that you need to take, that you share some degree of blame for, you need to take responsibility for that. You need to take responsibility for that, and that allows you to move on and go towards a solution. If you're involved in a crisis where you didn't do something, you weren't involved in something, there isn't blame to you, then you need to define whose fault it is, who's at blame. And especially when dealing with the news media, they look for stories, and stories have good guys in it and have bad guys in it. And if there's a problem, they're always looking for whose fault it is. And so you've got to either take responsibility to allow yourself to move on, or you've got to define whose fault it is. And the fifth thing is to take meaningful actions. I mean, if there's a problem that you're involved in, and you want to move forward, you can shape what's going on by taking meaningful actions. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just 1 second here. So I'm going to talk for a second about 2 case studies on cybersecurity and data breaches in the context of the 5 rules that I just gave you. So everybody's favorite organization, the credit bureau, Equifax. I was talking to one of my sons, late teens, early 20s, a couple of weeks ago, and explaining to them what credit bureaus were. And in the end, one of them said to me, why is this important? I said, why do I really need to pay attention to it? And I'm like, because they can screw up your life if you don't pay attention to them. Well, in 2017, Equifax screwed up a lot of people's life. They had one of the largest data breaches in U.S. history, with all kinds of sensitive information that was lost, and well over 100 million people. I guarantee that if not a majority, many people on this call had their personal information that was disclosed in this data breach. And this comes from somewhere that with an organization, credit bureaus that have your most sensitive data, and you expect them to have proper cybersecurity and to handle it properly. So the question is, what did Equifax do after this very large data breach that was getting tremendous amounts of attention, national attention? It was on all the major network news shows, page 1 of all the big papers. And what did they do? Well, they made a bunch of mistakes to start out with. They took 6 weeks to disclose the breach. That's when it came public, which of course raised questions on what have you been doing for the last 6 weeks? Our data is out there. Why didn't we know about this? They didn't engage with individuals. If we got 100 million people out there, they didn't engage with them at all. They gave no transparency into what happened. The actions they took were vague. They didn't take responsibility for what had happened. They really violated right from the beginning all of those rules that I just talked about. In fact, when you talk about transparency to give you credibility, when they were talking about the problem that they had, the reason for this is what they said. They said the vulnerability was an Apache Struts CVE 2017 5638. That's all they said about it. And it means just as much to everybody who read that as it means to all of us now. We have no idea what this means other than it's some technical thing, JIP or program, whatever it is. And then, following all of this, as sentiment was building against the company, they had a number of self-inflicted wounds. There was an inside trading scandal where, because of the 6-week lag, there was an investigation into whether executives had sold stock during that period. They had a second smaller breach. Their communications were incredibly disorganized out there. As a matter of fact, one of their communications people went out with a social media post on Happy Friday, and Friday's happy, and let's all have it's the end of the work week, and that was picked up by social media and put throughout the internet. They really were the gang that couldn't shoot straight. 2 months after the data breach, here's an article that appeared in Wire magazine. All the ways Equifax epically bungled its breach response. One of the quotes they said from that is, steady stream of graphs of revelations, and it paints a picture of Equifax deeply lacking response to a catastrophe. This is all having, when this is going on, this is all having a very, very severe impact on the company's reputation and on Equifax's brand. And to wrap it all up, last year, July of last year, there was a settlement on this data breach. And from that settlement, they went out and said, listen, if you were impacted, you can get $125. I know lots of people that went and registered for that $125, myself included. No one ever saw it because they didn't have enough money to pay everyone. The money was that they had was paid out very, very quickly. So they mismanaged that. So if you look at Capital One last summer, they had a similar sized data breach, one that they handled very, very well because they paid attention to the fundamentals of crisis management here. They took decisive action. Their breach was also over 100 million. I think it was 103 million people. They had an organized incident response unit that was on this immediately. They admitted that they made an error. By admitting they made an error, it gave them credibility. They fixed it. They let everybody know they fixed it. They went out, instead of just going with press releases out to contact everybody, they contacted all 103 million people individually. And they're very transparent about what happened, that they had weak security on one computer. They gave out detailed information on that. Again, it was transparent. And what that did is gave them credibility to engage with their audience, with their customers, with the general public. And if you take a look here, this is a screenshot from a couple of weeks after the data breach from their website, and very simple. Here's what happened and here's what we've done, right? And very good transparent communications. And if you look at the two of them, just compare them, you can see in the context of the rules I was talking about. There's a 6-week lag with Equibase. Capital One did it in 10 days, announced after 10 days. And they said we didn't announce it sooner because we were working with the FBI. Capital One took full responsibility. They fixed it, transparency, direct contact. in the end, the narrative, the stories out there about Equifax was it was a bungled response, an epically bungled response, and Capital One, it was a narrative that was under control because it was. But I think you can see when you talk about these fundamental reasons or these fundamental tenets of crisis communication and crisis management, by applying them, Capital One did everything just really perfectly. And in the end, just as a postscript, Richard Smith, the CEO of Equifax, was forced to resign 26 days after this was announced, and almost the entire senior management of Equifax were canned or retired. And by the way, this is not an unusual situation when corporations mishandle crises, when there's a lot of controversy over them. One of the things that's done very early in the recovery process is that management gets ousted. So now I want to talk about just a couple of things that about the fundamentals of the key fundamentals of crisis communications. Of a crisis communications plan. So whatever the size of your organization, if it's a large organization with many employees, if it's a small business, if it's an association, if you're an individual or you run just a business with a couple of employees, whatever the size, the fundamentals of preparing for a crisis are the same. The first thing is there's several key roles that you need to define, which is not difficult to do. The first one is if a crisis happens, right? What kind of crisis are you vulnerable to, right? If you're obviously in the banking business, you'd make that list and you would you'd put data breach at the top of it. If you're a trainer, if you're a racehorse a trainer. Equine fatalities are something that could come at the top of that list. So try to anticipate what types of crises could happen to you. Or in some cases it can be several people. You're going to immediately need media monitoring. So media monitoring, things move so quickly. You're going to need someone to look at the social media, what's developing on social media, certainly out in the news media with reporters and professional press. Media monitoring is absolutely key. When we deal with big crises at Xenophon, especially things that are breaking, we have several people that are doing nothing but media monitoring, so we can respond to things almost real time. You're going to need in advance in planning, you're going to need some intelligence on reporters and social influencers. That can range from going in and looking at, at a local level, what are the reporters who cover your industry or could cover your industry? Who are the influential people on social media? It can range from something as simple as that up to full media mapping. Media mapping is when you go in, something we do at Xenophon, where you go in, you analyze stories in the professional press, in the blogosphere, trends on social media back over a period of time, and you identify, key reporters who have been covering this. You identify key social influencers who are active on this, and it gives you kind of a target list to deal with. But it's important to get intelligence that's out there. And as soon as something happens, figuring out what your story is, right? It's what's your narrative. A story has really three components. It has a narrative. Here's the story that we're going to tell. Here are the key messages, which are the key components of that story. And the third one, which is sometimes forgotten, but is the most important of the three, which are proof points. You've got to have proof points in it to give you credibility, because without credibility on the story, you're not going to be able to push it very far. You're not going to have people that'll be accepting of it. You're going to say what's happened, and then you've got to prove that what you're saying is correct. And then the most fundamental of the fundamental, the most important element of crisis planning is the decision to engage. Without engagement, you stand little chance of impacting the story or impacting the narrative that's out there, be it on social media, be it with the professional press. And decision not to engage, people sometimes make out of fear of dealing with the media, but it's something that you've got to do, and you've got to make that decision quickly. In today's world, you can't decide to engage 3 days from now. You've got to do it very quickly. And the last thing is that responding in a crisis, engaging in a crisis, almost always deals with some level of written documents, whether it's statements, whether it's press releases, whatever it is, talking points that a spokesman's going to use. And it's important that you have an expedited approval process for that. This becomes more important as the size of the organization, goes up. We have a client that's a casino company. They have 86,000 employees. I think they have an entire building for their legal department. And getting things approved with that company can take a considerable period of time. But for crises, when they happen to them, we have an expedited process. We know who's going to do what, who in the legal department is in charge of doing the legal review, and it can turn around very quickly. Very important, especially as the size of your organization goes up. And let me just add one thing about lawyers. So first of all, let me say, I like lawyers. I work with lawyers my business, literally every day on every client we have, we're working with lawyers. But it's important to understand when you're in a crisis that by training, lawyers are, and I hate to generalize here, but most lawyers are putting an eye towards possible litigation. And possible litigation means that you're saying less rather than more. You're trying to give the opposition less rather than more on it. So it's very important to have good communications with the legal team who's working on it, be it one lawyer, be it 6 lawyers that are working on it, to have good communications with them so they understand the importance of communicating on this. So on one hand, you've got litigation that's possibly could come about. On the other hand, what you're dealing with is you're dealing with your reputation. You're dealing with the brand, whether it's your brand personally or the brand of your organization overall. So dealing with lawyers is quite important. And with that, I'll take questions, and maybe I will turn off this so you can actually see who you are talking with. And thank you. I'll be happy to take questions, engage in a dialogue.
Anybody have a question for David? I can honestly say, having been through a small crisis at the American Horse Council when we uncovered some fraud, that his points are very well taken and were instrumental in sort of helping me set my strategy for how to respond when we needed to take that action.
David, I have a question about social media.
Sure.
Obviously, that's had tremendous impact on the landscape during crises.
Oh,
can you lend a little insight into how social media has changed the way you counsel clients today?
Well, sure. It's best to look at social media. Sometimes people talk about old media. Sometimes people talk about new media, meaning social media. It really is, just media. The best way to look at it is one interconnected ecosphere. So things from social media can go over to professional journalism. It can go the other way. Academia is on there, government is on there, overall. So you really need a holistic approach to dealing with media. Anything that you're doing, whether it's outreach to to the press, for example, there's always a social media component of it as well. And when you're doing things proactively, we frequently counsel clients, when you're doing things proactively, social media can be a great benefit. Social media gives you the ability to go out and organize audiences around a shared interest, a shared concern. For example, we're doing a campaign now for the providers of autism services. And we're building direct out, and it's about insurance reimbursements, where we're building an audience around people who care about or are concerned with autism. And then you've got the communications tools to directly deal with them. But the short answer to your question is that social media is a component of everything that we do today in communicating in public communications.
Dave, thank you very much. All of your points are really good points.
Sure.
Do you have an opinion on whether it's better for when it's a nonprofit? Is it better for the CEO to be sort of the face and the spokesperson of responding to the crisis, or is it better for it to be the board president?
Either one is good because it's showing top executive engagement. So either one would work. A lot of it depends on the skill level of the individual and how comfortable they are dealing with things. If you've got someone who's not comfortable dealing with the media or not skilled at it, and by skilled, I don't mean necessarily that you have to have tons of experience doing it. Sometimes you meet people, we deal with people who are just naturals at public communications. But in short, either one would work. You've got to pick the best person out of those two. But as long as you bring it up, don't have your vice president for government affairs do it, or your vice president for whatever. You really, in a crisis, you really need to have top leadership out and speaking.
David, hey, Alex Waldrop here.
Oh, hey, Alex, how are you?
Good to hear your voice. Great,
Nice.
doing very well.
Yours.
So I'm going to ask you a question about doing crisis management, not from an entity standpoint, but from an organization or an industry standpoint.
Yeah.
Most of us in horse racing have to contend with the fact that it's not often the case that we have everyone on the same page.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
That occasionally happens in our business. It's it's related to the social media question that someone asked just a few minutes ago. But it's one of the ways in which we lose message discipline. How do you counsel organizations and industries to the extent that you can about a message discipline and speaking from the same script and trying to stay as disciplined as possible?
Well, so we tend to call it one voice, right? You want to be out with one voice, and one voice works better when you have one organization, obviously. But as long as the message points are compelling and they are communicated well to various organizations, you can generally get some level of buy-in. Of course, the exceptions are if there are differences of opinion in the industry on what should be done on a particular issue. But the number one counsel I would give on that is picking up the phone and talking with people, talking with individuals. There's some people on this call have sales experience, and if you've ever been trained in sales work, one of the things you're trained to do is to look ahead and anticipate someone's negatives, saying, oh, well, they might not like this because of it. You want to do the same thing and just anticipate what the negatives are and try to meet those.
Great, thanks.
Sure, Alex.
Me again, Kathy from Path International.
Hey, Kathy.
Uh, I know you spoke about how important transparency is, and I 100% agree. How do you counsel a leader who perhaps has other leaders in the organization that think it's a bad idea, that say, why would you, the breach only affected 25% of your membership, and they're not going to, probably nothing bad's going to happen because they didn't really get, important information, and so they'll never know. So we think it's better that you just don't even notify them. How do you, what wisdom can you give the leader that wants to be transparent?
First of all, when I say transparency, that doesn't mean give everybody everything, right? It means share on whatever the situation is. It share things that are going to help you. Explain it to people, to get them to accept it, to give you credibility. And far as people saying, there being a disagreement on an issue, how far it will go, who will learn about it. Listen, we live in an age of communications where everybody finds out everything in the end, right? And it's much better to have the doctrine of no surprises, to go out and communicate. That doesn't mean communicate everything to people, because obviously there are things that are confidential or things that might not benefit your organization. But in general, the wider the communications, the better. At Xenophon, we have one of our tenets in our business is the doctrine of no surprises, right? I tell people we don't ever want to get on a phone call with somebody and say, guess what? Right? You want to have communicated them well enough so there aren't surprises out there. No, Kathy, if we had been having this conversation some years ago, and if we had been having this conversation in 2008, for example, it would, my opinions would have been different then. Information was easier to, or it was less, the information was less fluid.
Other questions. David, how is there a scale for crisis? I mean, you talked about what constitutes a crisis, but there are, like you said, big and small. How do you decide if you're having a crisis?
It's like when you're in love, you just know it, right? I mean, when you're in a crisis, you're in a crisis. Your emotions are up. You get, people get worried. They frequently get afraid because of the possible impact on their company or on their life. I mean, some crises are just obvious, right? I mean, because someone's hair is on fire, right? I mean, sometimes we get, calls from companies where the CEO is in one corner of the office vomiting and the general counsel's in the other corner of the office vomiting. And, those are pretty evident. But if you've got a hunch that something can do you damage, then you're probably right. It can. And it's the potential for that for damage to your company, your organization, like I said at the beginning of the talk, or even you as an individual.
David, we've got about 10 minutes left. Maybe if you wouldn't mind, one of the more famous cases that I was aware that you were involved with was the Duke lacrosse players.
Yeah.
Can you give a little perspective on everyone on what we were facing and what the strategies that you had in hand? Because certainly those early days were pretty bleak for the players and their families.
So we got brought in to working for the Duke lacrosse players by a woman, Sheila Tate, who used to be Nancy Reagan's press secretary, who was a friend with one of the mothers of the players, and Sheila's kind of a mentor of mine. She didn't call me up and ask me to go work for them. She called me up and told me to go work for them. And when we got there into Durham, the situation was that the press, there was a feeding frenzy on these boys. Just to remind you of what happened is the lacrosse team had a party, and at the party at the off-campus house, and at the party they had underage drinking, and they hired 2 strippers to come in. Not laudable actions, but college students making mistakes. And at the end of that, one of the strippers claimed that she was raped by 3 individuals, and she was black and they were white. There's a big racial component to it, and the national media picked up on this story and just ran with it. As privileged, white kids going to Duke, poor stripper. And it just caught fire. The Today Show. I mean, there was so much coverage on this overall. When we got brought into it, it was in the context of just watching that. But I got down to Durham. I sat down with the lawyer who was the keeper of the evidence, and we spent about 6 hours going through things. And it became very clear from the evidence that these boys had not done this. One of them, Reed Seligman, had left the party before the alleged incident. It didn't happen before she claimed it happened. He had gotten in a cab. He had paid for the cab with his debit card. He went through Burger King. It was on the Burger King cab, and then swiped himself into the dorm. And so it really, from a strategic point of view, it wasn't so much, proving that these boys didn't do that. We believe that it would come out in the process, but the judicial process. But for us, it was, what were these boys going to have to live with after this was all over? Because they were either going to be acquitted or these charges were going to be dropped. The evidence was just too overwhelming. So we built a reputational model for them, looking at the various audiences and the things that would have to come out, because when this is all over, these young men had to go on with their lives. And as the story moved forward, what turned out had happened is the district attorney of Durham, Raleigh, North Carolina, was in a re-election campaign. And he had very consciously played a race card in order to court the African-American vote in the county. And he didn't pay any attention to any of this evidence. That came out. The charges were dropped against the boys overall. And probably the most important thing that we did strategically was we wanted them to be able to prove their innocence on a very large scale with a lot of people. So we negotiated a story with 60 Minutes, and during the interview, the 3 of them with 60 Minutes, we brought out a lot of this evidence, and we did it to a mass audience. The audience for that show is about 17.5 million. But 60 Minutes, the type of news organization that drives other news, that's out there. And I'm happy to report that all 3 of those boys today are now in their 30s. They're not boys anymore, but they're doing okay. As a matter of fact, Reed Seligman, the one I talked to earlier, because of that, he left Duke. He went to finish his undergraduate degree at Brown. Went to Brown Law School, and he is now a defense attorney. So that's kind of shaped his professional life. But they're all doing okay. But they were severely wronged by the university, by the county of Raleigh Durham, and they've been able to get on with their lives. But the things that happened, there was 100 professors from Duke that signed a letter condemning these 3 boys. And I think it's absolutely shameful that after it was very clear, the evidence was incontrovertible, that they didn't do it, that not one of those professors rejected the letter, recanted their signing of the letter. As a matter of fact, I got so mad at Duke when both of my sons went to college, we're looking at colleges. I said, I'll pay for any college in America that you go to except one. That's how bad I thought they did treated these boys. If there's any Duke alums on, sorry about that, but yeah, they really mistreated these boys.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody in the last few minutes we have here got anything else you'd like to ask David? Well, David, we want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us and sharing all this wisdom. And I'll just let everybody know if David is agreeable. I haven't really asked him his slides. David, would you share your slides if anybody's interested?
Yeah, absolutely, I will. It's this is done in something called Prezi, but we can convert it over to regular slides. And just one last thing, if anybody wants to, I can share this again. I always get asked for content. Well, it's not working again. But if you want to listen, if you want to get a hold of me for any reason, it's just dfuskis@Xenophon Strategies, or you can give me a call. My number is 202-258-8802, or send Julie an email and she'll
Drop me a note. I'm happy to share his contact information.